Game of Thrones Season 7 Episode 6 Review. The penultimate episode of the year delivers shocks and heartbreak. Spoiler alert, definitely don't read on if you don't want anything ruining. Especially that one big spoiler. Well, that was a rollercoaster ride, eh? After last week's Game of Thrones ended with a merry band of heroes venturing north of the Wall, we were dropped right into the action again this week. As the penultimate episode of the season, it was always going to be full of shocks and fight scenes, and this delivered in spades. Definitely don't read on if you don't want spoilers for the latest episode. Especially that one big spoiler. There's a lot of them around this week. Just the two major plot lines this week, the trek north of the Wall, and the growing hostilities between Arya and Sansa. Let's take the easier one first, the sibling battle going on in Winterfell. Arya is turning into a stone-cold serial killer type, clearly not coping with the trauma of her time in Braavos and seeing enemies everywhere. Sansa, meanwhile, is absolutely terrified of her sister after finding severed faces in her luggage. Who wouldn't be? And behind it all, stirring things up, is Littlefinger. Aidan Gillen gets another chance to shine after a few seasons of not seeing much action, and he's at his moustache-twirling best again. Baelish manages to persuade Sansa to send Brienne away to King's Landing, and it looks like he's going to attempt to organize the bumping off of one of the Stark girls before the end of the year. There was some really sterling acting by Maisie Williams and Sophie Turner here. It's great to see them both being a chance to stretch their talents a bit. In previous years, Sansa especially hasn't had much to do except be the unfortunate recipient of abuse from the show's meaner characters. Now Turner has a proper character development arc to get her teeth into, and she's done a fantastic job. Having said all that, I can't help but think all the problems with the Stark girls would go away if they sat down and had a chat with each other rather than just making vague mentions of traumas they've had. I suffered things you can't imagine, says Sansa. Blah 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 Game of Faces, says Arya. Maybe if they just ordered in a takeaway and had a proper heart-to-heart they'd sort all this mess out. Sample dialogue. Joffrey did this, Ramsay did that, I escaped though and won that battle. That sounds terrible. I became a ninja assassin, but it was all pretty harrowing and obviously I'm carrying a bit of trauma from it all. I went blind for a bit. By the way, you're not trying to take Jon's throne, are you? Littlefinger suggested you were. Oh no, not at all. By the way, Littlefinger has been bitching about you behind your back. Right. Grabs knife. See? Sorted. Meanwhile, beyond the Wall it all starts kicking off. Eventually. For the first 20-odd minutes we get a lot of walking in nice snowy scenery. It's like watching Lord of the Rings again. There's a nice moment between Jon and Jorah, when Jon offers to return to him Longclaw, the sword given to him by Jorah's father. Jorah makes a point of saying that he's lost the right to claim the weapon, and that it is for Jon and your children after. It seems Jorah of House Friendzone has noticed that Jon and Daenerys have been making gooey eyes at each other, and has resigned himself to being maid of honor at the wedding. However, there is still the tricky issue that Jon may actually be related to Dany. There's another hint about Jon's parentage when Beric tells him, "You don't look much like your father." This follows on from last week's revelation that Rhaegar Targaryen, Dany's brother, annulled his marriage and married someone else, widely assumed to be Lyanna Stark, who we know from last year is Jon's mother. Hopefully the season finale next week will see some shock reveal when everyone gets together for a showdown in King's Landing. Back over in Dragonstone, as things are continuing to sour between Dany and Tyrion. The Dragon Queen loses her temper pretty much exactly after Tyrion suggests to her, "You have been known to lose your temper from time to time." She's particularly vexed when Tyrion raises the issue of succession to the throne. I mean, she's got a point, she doesn't even have the throne yet, and all of a sudden he's trying to plan for after her death. But then her only kids are 80-meter-long flying lizards, so there's arguments for both sides. I'm enjoying seeing their dynamic change though. Tyrion wants to stick to her ideal of breaking the wheel and making real change for the everyday people. Dany meanwhile is starting to get a little impulsive, as he diplomatically puts it. She snaps at him. Perhaps if you planned for the short term we wouldn't have lost Dawn and Highgarden. She's got a point, but then her own decisions to take action got Drogon injured in the Blackwater Rush battle a couple of weeks ago. We're a solid half hour into the episode before the first hint of a zombie strides out of the mist, and what a zombie it is. A shout out has to go to the special effects team who managed to create an absolutely convincing zombie polar bear which then gets set on fire. In fact, the special effects throughout this episode are peerless. On top of the bear, and the 3 dragons flying around, we have an amazingly realized army of 10,000 zombie gribberbillies. Speaking of zombies, Jon, Jorah and pals catch themselves one to take back south. But then it screams and alerts the whole sodding army. They're swiftly surrounded on an island in the middle of an ice lake, and in the confusion an injured Thoros dies. Another character we didn't get to see enough of to really care about, but it does mean that Beric isn't going to be able to come back to life again I guess. Luckily the Fellowship gang managed to send Gendry back to Eastwatch to get help. And while it took him 34 episodes to row a boat a bit, he manages to get back surprisingly quickly and sends a raven to Dany for help. She again ignores Tyrion's advice. One day she'll learn, and flies all 3 of her dragons north to mount a rescue. I'm not going to go into the same point I've made all year about how people are covering vast distances in no time at all. But same thing applies. She arrives in the nick of time to save everyone, lucky that, but heartbreak. The Night King apparently has a hell of an arm on him, and spears one of her dragons with an ice spear and sends him crashing into the ice. She's forced to flee before he can take out the other 2, leaving Jon to a watery grave under a mountain of zombies. She seems to be more upset about losing Jon than one of her children, and gazes forlornly back from the wall. Fortunately, Jon is too much of a main character on the show to actually die properly, so his uncle Benjen arrives in the nick of time to save him, lucky that. Again, Jon is able to ride back to Eastwatch, for a lovey-dovey reunion with Dany. Wait, don't call her that, she tells him her brother used to call her that. Cough, foreshadowing cough. The death of the dragon Viserion finally got Game of Thrones back on track. For most of this season we've lost a little of the suspense, as it has appeared that everything was bound to turn out okay for the surviving characters. One of the joys of George R.R. Martin's work is that